Hi, everyone. Hi, I'm Robert Hackett from Fortune, and I've got with me Jalak Jobanputra from FuturePerfect, which is a blockchain-focused VC firm that she founded, and Noelle Acheson, who works on new media at CoinDesk, which is one of the best publications out there for cryptocurrency news. And so we're going to be talking about ICOs, a new fundraising phenomenon that's very hot right now. People are raising billions of dollars. Hundreds of projects have raised billions of dollars in the past few years on this. And so I want to kick things off just with a question first. How many people have participated in an ICO?
Wow.
We've got quite a few people who have actually done this before. But for the people who didn't raise their hands, maybe could you describe what is an ICO?
Well, it's an initial coin offering, and it's become an alternative way for startups to raise capital. And often the coin that they're offering is a utility that developers will use, and it incentivizes companies to build out networks of users and developers so then they can kind of build on the blockchain. And then often these tokens are tradable on some of the cryptocurrency exchanges, which has led to a bit of the speculative element of the coin offerings.
There's a little bit of a speculative element.
So just a little bit, but I think that's starting to change, or there are different kinds of terms that are evolving around different coin offerings. So the ones that kind of have protocols that are going to require a longer-term development time frame, will have lockup periods, similar to what you see around other kinds of stock offerings. So we're seeing a maturity of this kind of phenomenon, and we'll continue to see that over the next year.
Right.
And if I could jump in there, I mean, the maturity that Jalak mentioned is going to shed light on the fact that ICO is a fairly ridiculous name for what's happening. I mean, it's like the tech terms that get hyped, they extend their use. I've seen it used as a noun, I've seen it used as a verb, I've even seen it used as an adjective, I'm not joking. And when you think about it, ICO is also a pretty stupid name for something that right now is beyond regulation, although that's changing, because ICO sounds like IPO, which is very regulated. Why call it that? And especially the coin part, initial coin offering. They're not coins, they are, as Jalak mentioned, digital tokens which have utility or promise a revenue stream, but it's the digital token part that is the interesting feature in this new concept, rather than the coin, rather than the speculation, rather than the ICO part of it.
And what I think is exciting around this is that if this does develop into its own asset class, it allows users and developers of a specific product to then be able to recognize, get some revenue streams back, or get some value back for their usage, versus a Facebook right now where we're giving up all our data to Facebook. They're making billions of dollars of revenue off of that data, but we don't really see any of that money or much utility back from them. So that's where I think this could be really game-changing technology.
So just prior to this, I interviewed Joseph Lubin, who's a co-founder of Ethereum, and he has spoken about how he doesn't like the term ICO, as you were saying, because it sounds a little too similar to IPO. It kind of flies in the face of regulators.
Yep.
What's your preferred terminology for this, Jalak?
Look, there's a new term called token generation events, so TGEs.
Sort of a mouthful.
It doesn't roll off the tongue quite as easily, does it?
I personally don't mind the ICO moniker. I mean, I think it is what it is. Regulators are going to pay attention no matter what, as they should. I mean, we've seen a large amount of fraud in these token offerings. So, I personally don't mind the moniker. I think regulators will pay attention no matter what.
So, I mean, there are storied ways to raise money out there. Venture capital is an industry that's thrived for a while. What are the advantages of having an ICO? I mean, why would you opt for this new weird kind of way of doing things when there is a traditional route for you to raise funds for your project?
Well, apart from the whole new way of looking at business that Jalak mentioned earlier, it is, or it has proven to be, for good and for bad, a very easy, quick way to raise a lot of money without a business plan, without a working product, tapping into the enthusiasm, is a kind way of saying it, that's been going on in the market at the moment. So this is why it has eclipsed temporarily venture capital and other forms of traditional financing, simply because it is fairly easy. It's also described, and fairly, as a way for businesses, startups, new projects, protocols, to bypass the traditional venture capital route, which is, as those of you who have tried it know, is fairly limited, not that easy to access. You have to jump through a lot of hoops to get there. However, as Jalak knows, because she is a venture capitalist, that actually can be a good thing, having to jump through those hoops.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the number of startups that are actually able to access venture capital, I think it's like 1% or 2%. It's you know, there's really a mismatch in terms of the number of, you know, ideas out there that could potentially scale versus, you know, kind of the bandwidth of VCs and kind of the different strategies of VCs. And then we started to see crowdfunding, you know, to take off. And I think this is kind of the next step of that, which is, you know, the people who are kind of investing in a project will then be, you know, truly invested beyond just getting a product back. They'll get to participate in the upside. So I do think it's exciting. I think it is impacting venture. However, you know, I've been a VC since '99. I have seen two major cycles: the dot-com bust and then the 2008 financial crash in New York. And I have to say that you know, a lot of entrepreneurs who thought they were going to do ICOs in, you know, the last few months have kind of stepped back a little bit and realized, well, you know, they can do an ICO down the road, but maybe it makes sense to raise some equity, you know, in the more traditional route and kind of get a base going, and then do the ICO to, you know, once more of the product is built out. And because we are starting to see a slowdown in ICOs, and part of it is, you know, we're starting to see regulation around the world, and it's very inconsistent regulation. And so I think that's going to take a little bit of time to settle down, and then the investors in these ICOs are getting a little savvier. You know, we've had Tezos, which now has a class action lawsuit on the table, and so, you know, the governance structure that they had figured out turns out, you know, may not be the right governance structure. And I think these are all growing pains to be expected, but it's also made investors in ICOs aware that, you know, that this is the Wild West.
Noelle, what's your take on Tezos?
Take on governance problems, interesting idea, but this is the thing about ICOs in general. It may be easier to raise funds through this method, but as anyone who's tried it knows, raising funds is just the first step. You then actually have to run a business, and as anyone who's tried it knows, that is very, very difficult. This also highlights one of the big risks to what's been happening in the market at the moment. A lot of money pouring into a lot of projects, not a lot of fundamentals behind it, and even if it weren't about financing companies, surely the regulators are going to want to pay attention to that, just simply from a risk point of view. But drawing on what Jalak was saying earlier about the quietening down of the sector, now it's going to get really interesting. Now we are going to see less fraud because of the regulatory attention and also media attention and savvier investors. And now is when we are going to see the combination of both types, which basically highlights, underlines the idea that ICOs aren't disrupting VC financing as much as they are a complement to it. I mean, both Jalak and I know many companies who are using both models. The ICO does allow for innovative business models, but then the venture capital support is longer lasting. You have the business experience behind it. You have the contacts that provides, and it builds a more lasting ecosystem.
So elaborate on that for me. How are these two things working in partnership with one another? Because when ICOs first came out, they were sort of seen as a way to go around traditional venture capital raising and more established methods of raising funds. It seemed like they were going to be at odds with one another, but that's not how things have panned out. Is that right?
That's how I see it happening. I do see venture capital funds providing the longer lasting support that big growth businesses are going to need. But then it comes down to the token side of the ICO. The tokens, as part of a utility platform, as part of new protocols, can offer an entirely new business model that even venture capitalists are increasingly looking at. We are increasingly going to see venture capitalists like Jalak's firm investing in tokens, but not so much for the speculation, but simply as a way to develop new ecosystems, new ways of looking at processes.
So an example is Civic, which I was an equity investor in 2015. Vinny Lingham, his previous company was Gift. He sold to First Data. I think we met when we were both speaking at CoinDesk's consensus conference in 2014.
He's also a shark on South Africa's
That's
Shark
right,
Tank,
right. And I was, we kind of bonded because I was born in Nairobi. He's South African, and we both kind of believe in the kind of emerging market, kind of global potential of blockchain technology. And so when he started his next company, I invested. And then just in the spring, Civic did a coin offering, which is widely heralded as like a great example of a token offering. I mean, they raised $33 million. They could have raised, triple that amount, but, it was important to him to make sure that they had a use of funds that made sense for where they were in the process. It's an identity platform. So if I bought a token in the sale, I contribute my kind of identity information, and then the utility I get back is when anybody, a bank, an institution out there is trying to use my social security number or my address or any of the identity that I've contributed to the platform, I get notified and can block that if I want to. And the identity is not stored on a server like Equifax did and compromised all of our information. It's stored on the blockchain in different pieces and with access to keys. So it's the storage of that information and then the access and then the control that the token users get, which is the utility. And so that's an example where, I'm an equity holder. I also hold some of the tokens, and I think this is a business model that makes sense for what they're doing. Now, I think 95% of the token offerings I'm seeing out there do not make sense in terms of the business model, and certainly would not participate in those. But there are those cases where the entrepreneur sees the value of having VCs on their board and involved early, and then, as Noelle said, utilize the tokens for their business model as they build out the business.
What's the best ICO you've seen and the worst ICO you've seen?
Well, I am, partial to Civic because I also, am excited about the implications of what this token will do in terms of, help people and kind of create a very valuable business. Identity in general is an area that I think, we haven't found good solutions in the last, 100 years around identity or secure solutions. So that's one where I think, blockchain technology can actually provide the right solution that the internet didn't, and so that's one that I'm just I'm excited about. I mean, the worst are just Me Too companies. It's very similar to when I was investing in the late '90s and the internet. I was out in Silicon Valley, and you saw 100 pets.com out there, and we know pets.com didn't do well, but then there were hundreds of copycats. No pun intended there. And so I'm just seeing hundreds of derivatives, and that's just not exciting. I think it unfortunate that Tezos has these governance issues because I think that there's some good technology potentially there, but I want to see ICOs happen when there's more technology built out, and I haven't seen enough of that.
Yeah, and I would highlight that and totally agree, in that the ICOs to avoid, in my opinion, are the ones that need that to raise money. They don't have any other way of raising money. The interesting ones are those that wouldn't have trouble getting investors another way, but the token, rather than the ICO, the token issuance is part of their business plan. It adds extra value to the whole idea.
And so same question to you. Which one is the best ICO you've seen? A model ICO?
Nice try.
They cross their T's out of their eyes? Not going to...
Nice try.
OK. Well, what ICO projects are interesting to you that you've seen out there? We won't regard this as investment advice, but I'm wondering if there are any projects that have really piqued your interest.
Again, I can't name names, but I will simply repeat that the ones to look out for are the ones that are disrupting business models. Not even disrupting, but maybe creating entirely new ones that we haven't even thought of before, new processes. Because for me, the most interesting thing about this space is not the easy financing, although that has its advantages. Then again, there are other ways to do that. It's the value that the token can provide to processes, ideas, systems, eco-structures, the whole new, we're talking finance, identity, we're talking healthcare, we're talking an opportunity to rethink why things are the way they are, how they can be different, and how value can be extracted from this new technology.
So we may have some people in the audience who are considering having an ICO themselves. So what should they veer away from? What's a no-no when it comes to this new world of financing?
Well, first they should ask themselves, you should ask yourself, why are you doing this? Are you doing this to raise money easily, in which case investors are going to probably notice. You probably get some money, but then what? Ask yourself why. And if it is to use the token to do something that you couldn't do without that token, then go ahead, then roll out the business plan. Try and get some sort of model going if you can beforehand, but make sure you have the whole process and the governance thoroughly thought through. It's the why that I think is very important.
And Jalak, same question to you. What should people steer clear from? And we've got about half a minute left. So.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think, and going back to wanting to see the technology built out, the more that you can show that you've built out technology that works instead of that tech risk being a huge issue and a huge part of that, then I think if there's a story on why it makes sense, go for it.
If I had an ICO, would you invest in me?
Well, I haven't seen the white paper yet.
OK. I'll be sure to pass a white paper your way at the end of this session.
And it's the why, again.
But thank you all for joining us.
Yes, thank you.
And thank you for listening in.
Thank you.
Thank you.